No assistant ever lasted a full week working for the mafia boss billionaire in a wheelchair until the barista who corrected his latte broke every single rule. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, have you ever trusted someone so much that you couldn't imagine they'd ever hurt you? And at the end, don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10. Enjoy the story. The third night without sleep found Gaddis staring at the faint glow of her phone screen. A message notification blinked. You deserve the truth. It was from a private number. The attached photo shattered her breath. Her husband, Lance, the man she'd built 7 years of marriage with, was in their kitchen kissing Mira, her best friend since college. The same kitchen where she'd baked Mira's birthday cake 2 days earlier. The betrayal didn't come quietly. It came with screenshots, whispers from neighbors, and a deafening silence when she confronted him. Lance didn't deny it. He just said, "You've been too busy chasing your little dreams, Gaddis. Mira understands ambition." That night, Gaddis packed a suitcase and left the keys on the counter, next to the untouched anniversary card she'd written him. The apartment she found was smaller than the walk-in closet she'd left behind. 3rd floor, no elevator, a radiator that clanged like a prisoner rattling bars. The walls were thin enough to hear her neighbor's television through the plaster, but it was hers. No shared lease. No memories of laughter that had curdled into lies. Just 4 walls and the space to figure out who she was without him. Except figuring out who you were required money. And money required work. And work required showing up somewhere every day and pretending your life hadn't collapsed like a house of cards in a hurricane. With her savings nearly gone and the rent overdue, Gaddis took a job at a downtown cafe. The grindhouse sat on the corner of 5th and Madison. All exposed brick and Edison bulbs, the kind of place where freelancers typed novels that would never get published, and venture capitalists pretended to be humble over $7 lattes. She wore her grief like armor, hiding it beneath a brown apron and fake smiles that hurt her face by the end of every shift. The work was mechanical. Steam, pour, repeat, smile, swipe card, repeat. Don't think about how Lance used to order 2 cappuccinos every Sunday morning. Don't think about how Mira used to joke that Gaddis made the best coffee in the city. Don't think. Just move. But every day, at exactly 8:47 in the morning, the same customer arrived. A man in a crimson suit, rolled in by 2 silent bodyguards who looked like they communicated entirely in violence. His name was Berard. She'd heard the whispers. Reclusive billionaire. Mafia ties. The kind of cold that wasn't temperature, but absence. A black hole where warmth used to be. His eyes were ice blue. The color of a frozen lake, right before it cracks beneath your feet. Rumors said his last assistant had vanished after spilling coffee on him. Not fired. Vanished. As in, no forwarding address, no social media updates, just gone like smoke in wind. Gaddis had been making his coffee for 3 weeks. Cappuccino. Double shot. No sugar. He never made eye contact. Never said thank you. Just placed a $100 bill on the counter every Friday, as if gratitude could be purchased in bulk and distributed at his convenience. She told herself she didn't care. She told herself a lot of things that weren't true anymore. One morning, the espresso machine jammed. Not the gentle hiccup of a clogged filter, but the grinding, shrieking death rattle of a machine that had finally had enough. The manager panicked, flapping his hands like a bird trying to achieve flight through anxiety alone. "We have orders! We have the morning rush! We have Berard coming in 14 minutes!" Gaddis set down the milk pitcher. "I can fix it. You're a barista, not a mechanic. I'm a design graduate who worked in product development for 3 years before She stopped herself. Before her life had imploded. I can fix it." She grabbed a screwdriver from the back office and got to work. Pressure valve, steam wand, heating element. Her hands remembered things her mind had tried to forget. She'd been good at this once. Building things, solving problems, being useful in ways that mattered. The machine coughed, sputtered, then hummed back to life. Gaddis wiped her hands on her apron just as the door opened. Crimson suit, ice blue eyes. Wheelchair cutting through the cafe like a knife. Through silence. Berard rolled up to the counter. For the first time in 3 weeks, he looked directly at her. Not through her. Not past her. At her. "You fixed it," he said softly. His voice was smooth, controlled, the kind of voice that never had to raise itself to be obeyed. Gaddis shrugged. It wasn't complicated. Just needed someone to pay attention to what was broken. "You're not like the rest." She continued wiping down the steam wand, not looking up. "Because I still have something left to lose." The silence that followed was heavy, textured. She could feel him studying her, cataloging her scars, the way someone might examine a piece of art for hidden signatures. When she finally glanced up, his expression hadn't changed, but something in his posture had. A slight tilt of the head. Recognition, maybe. Or interest. "What's your name?" "Gaddis." He repeated it, tasting each syllable. Then he accepted his cappuccino from her coworker, left his customary $100 bill, and rolled toward the door. But before his bodyguards could push him through, he paused. "The things worth losing," he said without turning around, "are the only things worth keeping." Then he was gone. Gaddis stood there, screwdriver still in her hand, trying to understand what had just happened. Mina, her coworker, appeared at her elbow. "Did he just have a conversation with you?" "I think so." "In 3 weeks, I've never heard him say more than double shot, no sugar." Mina's eyes were wide. "What did you do?" "Fixed the machine." "Said something true." Gaddis set down the screwdriver. "I have no idea." That evening, Gaddis climbed the 3 flights to her apartment, arms loaded with discount groceries and a fatigue so deep it felt like gravity had doubled. She was digging for her keys when she noticed the envelope. Cream-colored paper. Expensive. The kind of stationery that cost more than her weekly grocery budget. It was wedged into her doorframe. No postage. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of letterhead. Whitmore and Associates. Estate law. Below that, 3 sentences that stopped her heart. "Dear Miss Gaddis Fairchild, we are writing to inform you of a previously undisclosed inheritance from the estate of Margaret Fairchild, your late grandmother. The sum of $90,000 has been held in trust pending your 28th birthday and appropriate verification. Please contact our office to schedule an appointment with the executor, Berard Holdings and Finance." Gaddis read it 3 times. Her grandmother had died when she was 19. There had been a small funeral, a few distant relatives, no mention of money. Margaret Fairchild had lived simply, a retired schoolteacher in a modest house upstate. $90,000 wasn't just unexpected, it was impossible. But there it was, black ink on cream paper, real. She pulled out her phone and dialed the number listed. A receptionist answered on the second ring. "Whitmore and Associates, how may I direct your call?" "I received a letter about an inheritance. Margaret Fairchild. The executor is listed as Berard Holdings and Finance. I need to schedule an appointment." A pause. Keyboard clicks. "1 moment, please." "Then, we have availability tomorrow at 10 a.m. The address is 5th and Madison, 72nd floor. Will that work?" 5th and Madison. The same building as the Grindhouse. The same building where Berard arrived every morning in his crimson suit and $100 bills. Gaddis closed her eyes. "Yes, that works." She hung up and stared at the letter. $90,000. Enough to pay off her debts. Enough to start over. Enough to stop pouring coffee and start rebuilding the life Lance and Mira had burned to the ground. But why was Berard the executor? And why did it feel like the machine she'd fixed that morning wasn't the espresso maker at all, but some larger mechanism she'd just set into motion without understanding what it would do? Outside, the city hummed. Sirens wailed. Someone laughed in the apartment below. And Gaddis stood in her tiny kitchen, holding a letter worth $90,000, wondering if the man in the crimson suit had been waiting for her to fix more than just a broken machine. The Berard Holdings Tower was all glass and steel, a vertical glacier that reflected the city back at itself in cold, distorted panels. Gaddis stood at the base, neck craned, counting floors until she lost track somewhere around 40. 72 was a concept, not a destination. A place where gravity worked differently and people like her didn't belong. She wore her brown apron because she'd come straight from her morning shift. There hadn't been time to go home and change, and part of her, the part that was still angry about everything, refused to dress up for a man who tipped in $100 bills but couldn't be bothered to say thank you. The lobby was marble and silence. Her sneakers squeaked against the polished floor, announcing her presence like an alarm. The security desk sat in the center, a fortress of monitors and men in suits who looked like they'd been carved from the same granite as the building's foundation. She approached with the letter held out like a passport. "I have an appointment. 10th floor. Berard Holdings." The guard didn't take the letter. He picked up a phone, murmured something she couldn't hear, then nodded toward the elevators. 72nd floor. They're expecting you. 72nd, not 10th. She opened her mouth to correct him, but he'd already turned away, done with her existence. The elevator was the kind that moved so smoothly you couldn't tell if you were rising or if the world was falling away beneath you. Gaddis watched the numbers climb, her reflection ghosting back at her in the polished steel doors. She looked small, tired, out of place in her apron, and doubt. The doors opened to a corridor that felt like stepping into a freezer. Black glass walls, recessed lighting that hummed like a headache. And at the far end, double doors, flanked by two men who radiated the kind of stillness that came right before violence. One of them spoke into his wrist. The other watched her approach with eyes that catalogued exits and weaknesses in the same glance. She stopped 3 feet away, close enough to be heard, but far enough to run if running became necessary. "I'm here about an inheritance. Margaret Fairchild." The man on the left nodded once. The doors opened. The office beyond was not an office. It was a statement. Onyx desk, positioned beneath a single overhead light that felt more like an interrogation lamp than interior design. No photographs, no plants. No evidence that a human being worked here instead of some perfectly calibrated machine. And behind the desk, in a wheelchair that probably cost more than her yearly rent, sat Berard in a red suit that blazed against the darkness like sin-made fabric. "Gaddis," he said smoothly, as if they were old friends meeting for lunch. "You've been serving me coffee for weeks. Now you're serving fate." She stopped just inside the doorway. "The inheritance." He gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Sit." She sat. The chair was leather, expensive, designed to make you feel small. Berard rolled forward slightly, his hands resting on the arms of his wheelchair with the precision of someone who never made accidental movements. "The inheritance was deposited through one of my offshore channels. Your grandmother and I had an arrangement." "What kind of arrangement?" He smiled. "The kind that kept her comfortable for 30 years and ensured you'd have something when you needed it most." He slid a folder across the desk. Inside was the letter she'd received, along with a second document, a contract. Gaddis opened it. The first page was standard legal language. The second page made her stomach drop. "You'll get your $90,000, Berard said, "after 1 month. I need an assistant, someone the families don't suspect, someone ordinary." She laughed. It came out bitter, sharp-edged. "Me? I can barely trust myself." "Good." He leaned back, studying her with those ice-blue eyes that saw too much. "Distrust keeps you alive." "I pour coffee. I don't know anything about—" She gestured at the office. "The towers of silence and power. This. You fix things. You pay attention. You don't flinch." He tapped the contract. "Those are the only qualifications that matter. The families expect me to hire from the usual channels. Law schools. Business degrees. People they've already bought or broken. You're neither. That makes you useful." "And if I say no?" "Then you walk out of here with nothing. And in 3 months, when your landlord evicts you and your ex-husband's lawyer takes what's left, you'll wish you'd said yes." The words hit like a slap because they were true. She stared at the contract. 1 month. $90,000. A chance to rebuild before the wreckage buried her completely. What are the rules? Berard's smile widened, sharp as a blade. "Rule 1, no questions. Rule 2, no phone inside the office. Rule 3, No sympathy. You work, you follow instructions, you don't ask why. She picked up the pen, signed her name. Gaddis Fairchild in black ink that felt like sealing something she couldn't take back. You start tomorrow, 8 a.m. He rolled backwards slightly, dismissing her with the movement. And Gaddis, the apron stays downstairs. The first day, she broke 3 rules before lunch. She rearranged his schedule because the original version had him in back-to-back meetings with no time to eat or breathe or be human. She corrected his grammar in a speech draft, crossing out corporate jargon and replacing it with something that sounded like a person instead of a press release. And when he snapped at her for the changes, she asked, "Why hide behind the chair when you can stand?" The office went silent, the kind of silence that had weight and teeth. Berard's hands tightened on the arms of his wheelchair, knuckles going white. For 5 seconds, she thought she'd miscalculated. That this was how assistants vanished. Then he said, very quietly, "Get out." She left, spent the rest of the afternoon reorganizing files and wondering if she'd just thrown away $90,000 for the satisfaction of being right. But the next morning, when she arrived, the scheduled changes were still in place, and the speech had been sent to the board with her edits intact. He didn't apologize. He didn't explain. He just said, "Coffee," and went back to work. 3 weeks passed. She learned the rhythm of his world. Meetings that were negotiations wrapped in threats. Phone calls conducted in languages she didn't speak, but understood through tone alone. Enemies who smiled in conference rooms and sharpened knives in the parking garage. She learned that Berard slept 4 hours a night, that he took his coffee black after noon, that he never, ever let anyone touch his desk. And late one evening, when she was supposed to be gone, she heard something, a faint mechanical whir coming from behind the bookshelf. She followed the sound, found a seam in the wall, pushed. The panel slid open to reveal a hidden room, parallel bars, resistance bands. A robotic frame that looked like something from a rehabilitation center, all chrome and hydraulics. And in the center of it, Berard, out of the wheelchair, strapped into the frame, hands gripping the bars, trying to lift himself. His arms shook, veins stood out like cables beneath his skin. Sweat soaked through his shirt. She should have left, should have pretended she'd seen nothing. Instead, she said, "You're allowed to fail once before you rise." He froze, looked at her with an expression somewhere between rage and exhaustion. "Get out." "No." She stepped closer. "You can order me out. You can fire me. But I'm not leaving until you finish the set." For a long moment, he just stared. Then, slowly, he lowered himself, reset his grip, and tried again. This time, he made it halfway up before his strength gave out. But she counted it. Said, "1. Like it mattered. Like it was enough." He didn't thank her. But he didn't order her out again either. 2 days later, she was cleaning his desk, carefully wiping down the onyx surface without moving anything. When she found it, a sealed envelope tucked beneath a stack of contracts, marked in faded ink, for A.G. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a photograph, black and white. Her grandmother, younger, smiling, shaking hands with a man in his 20s, dark hair, sharp features, ice blue eyes. Berard. The date stamp in the corner read 1987, 38 years ago, before Gaddis was born, before any of this made sense. She turned. Berard was watching from the doorway, expression unreadable. "Who was she to you?" He rolled forward, closed the door, and for the first time since she'd met him, his voice carried something other than control. Everything. She was everything. If this story hasn't made you question who you trust yet, maybe you're not paying close enough attention to your own life. So hit subscribe before the next betrayal catches you off guard too. The photograph lay on the desk between them like evidence at a crime scene. Her grandmother's smile frozen in black and white. Berard's younger face, sharper but unmistakably him. The handshake that connected them across decades. You knew my grandmother, Gaddis said. It wasn't a question.
Berard's eyes sharpened, going from unreadable to something closer to calculation.
He rolled closer to the desk, picked up the photograph with careful fingers, studied it as if seeing it for the first time in years. Margaret Fairchild was the only person who believed in me when belief was a currency I couldn't afford. He set the photo down, aligned it precisely with the edge of the desk. 1987. I was 23. No family, no credentials, no reason for any legitimate institution to take a chance on a kid from the docks with an offshore import idea and a handshake deal with the wrong people. And she gave you money. She gave me a future. When the banks refused, when the venture capitalists laughed me out of boardrooms, your grandmother walked into my one-room office above a hardware store and wrote me a check. No collateral, no contract, just her word that if I succeeded, I'd remember where I started. Gaddis felt something cold spreading through her chest. The inheritance was repayment, decades delayed, with interest your grandmother never asked for but deserved. He met her eyes. The $90,000 you inherited wasn't random, Gaddis. It was orchestrated. She made me promise that when you turned 28, when you'd lived enough to understand what starting over costs, I'd give you the same chance she gave me. Before Gaddis could respond, before she could process what it meant that her entire financial lifeline had been engineered by a dead woman and a mafia-connected billionaire, the office doors slammed open. A man in a charcoal suit stormed in, face tight with barely controlled rage, Berard's consigliere. She'd seen him twice before, always at a distance, always radiating the kind of authority that came from knowing where bodies were buried because he'd helped dig the holes. The syndicate meeting is tonight, he said, not bothering to acknowledge Gaddis's existence. She shouldn't be here.
Berard didn't turn, didn't flinch. His voice came out cold enough to frost glass. She stays.
You don't know what you're doing.
I know exactly what I'm doing, Vincent. Berard's wheelchair rotated smoothly, bringing him face to face with the consigliere.
And you're wasting time I don't have. Get the conference room ready.
Vincent's jaw worked. His eyes flicked to Gaddis with something between contempt and warning. Then he turned and left, slamming the door hard enough to make the photograph on the desk flutter.
What's the syndicate meeting?
Gaddis asked.
The kind you don't ask questions about.
Berard rolled toward the hidden panel, the one that led to his rehabilitation room.
But you're about to sit through it anyway. Stay quiet. Stay invisible. And whatever you hear, you forget the moment you walk out of that room. The conference room was all dark wood and darker intentions. 12 men sat around a table that could have hosted a state dinner.
They wore expensive suits and cheap morals, their faces carved from the same stone as their reputations. Gaddis sat in the corner, a chair positioned far enough from the table to suggest she didn't matter. Berard took his place at the head. Vincent sat to his right, still radiating disapproval.
The meeting started with numbers, territory disputes, shipping routes, revenue projections that sounded legitimate until you realized they were discussing cargo that breathed and contraband that killed.
Gaddis kept her face neutral, her breathing steady, playing the role of invisible assistant, who heard nothing and remembered less.
Then one of the men, older, with silver hair and a scar bisecting his left eyebrow, leaned forward. We need to discuss the accident. Your accident, Berard.
The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees.
It's been 3 years, the man continued. We've honored the ceasefire, but questions remain. Who planted the device? Who benefits from you in that chair?
Gaddis's hands tightened on the armrests. Berard's expression didn't change. The matter is closed.
Is it? Because our sources say it wasn't Dimitri's crew. Wasn't the Koreans. Wasn't anyone from the families. The man's smile was a blade. It was a courier. Low level. Paid in cash by someone who wanted you crippled, not dead. Vincent cut in. This isn't the time. No, Berard said quietly. Let him finish. The courier's name was Lance Farrow. Worked for the Rivera family as a runner. Took a contract. Planted the device under your car. Collected $20,000. And disappeared into civilian life.
The scarred man pulled out a tablet,
slid it across the table. We found him 2 months ago. Runs a cafe now. Married. Comfortable. He leaned back. Thought you'd want to know.
Gaddis stopped breathing. Lance. Her Lance. The man she'd built 7 years with. The man who'd said she was too busy chasing dreams. The man who'd stolen her best friend and her trust. And apparently, years before any of that, had stolen Berard's ability to walk. The room spun. She gripped the chair harder, nails digging into leather, trying to anchor herself to something solid, while the world rearranged itself into a shape she didn't recognize. Berard's voice cut through the noise in her head. Thank you for the information. Consider it noted.
Noted? The scarred man laughed. That's it? No retaliation? No justice?
Justice, Berard said softly, is a long game, and I'm very patient. The meeting ended 20 minutes later. Gaddis barely heard the rest. Her mind was stuck on a loop. Lance. Bomb. $20,000. Betrayal, stacked on betrayal, like a house of cards built from lies. When the room cleared, Berard rolled over to her. We need to talk. She stood, walked past him, through the office, into the elevator. She didn't remember pressing the button for the lobby, didn't remember stepping outside. Only that suddenly she was in the rain, water soaking through her apron, her hair, her skin, and it still wasn't enough to wash away the truth. Berard found her on the corner, his wheelchair cutting through puddles like a ship through dark water. His suit was getting ruined. He didn't seem to care. He took my legs, Berard said, voice low enough that she had to stop shaking to hear him. Your husband took my legs, and you had no idea. That makes you a victim too. I married him. I trusted him. I built a life with a man who plants bombs for money. And he betrayed you, the same way he betrayed me. Berard rolled closer. But you can take back your power, Gaddis. The inheritance. Use it. Build something that's yours. Let the past pay for your future. I don't want blood money. It's not blood money. It's your grandmother's faith in you, converted to currency. He pulled out a folded document from inside his jacket, somehow still dry. A partnership contract. Your cafe. Your name. My investment network. Legitimate. Legal. Yours. She stared at the paper, rain turning the ink blurry at the edges. I can't. Yes, you can. I don't even know who I am anymore. Then become someone new. He held out a pen. Someone who doesn't let the people who hurt her win. Gaddis turned away, pulled out her phone with shaking hands, opened social media, and there it was, posted 6 hours ago. A grand opening announcement. The Brewhaven. A cafe with exposed brick and Edison bulbs. Her design. Her dream. Lance and Mira cutting a ribbon. All smiles and stolen futures. The caption read, New beginnings with the love of my life. Something inside her cracked. Not broke. Cracked. Like ice under pressure. Ready to either shatter or become something harder. She took the pen. Signed the contract on the hood of a parked car. Rain smearing her signature into something that looked like fury made legal. Let's rebuild differently, she whispered. Berad's smile was sharp and satisfied. Then we burn first. If you've ever needed a sign to stop letting the people who wronged you win, this is it. So subscribe and share before you forget what fighting back feels like. A week later, Berard and Gaddis appear publicly at a charity gala. Rumors swirl. The Mafia boss and his barista. The PR director cuts the microphone mid-speech to humiliate them. Gaddis doesn't flinch. She takes the stage, speaking over the silence. He once told me rules protect power, but sometimes breaking them saves a soul. Cameras flash as Berard rises from his chair, 2 canes, slow and defiant. I am not less dangerous standing, he says. The crowd erupts. Across town, Lance watches the broadcast, realizing the man he betrayed is now publicly reclaiming his empire with his ex-wife beside him.
Gaddis uses the inheritance, doubled by Berard's investments, to open the Gaddis Code Cafe, a legitimate franchise employing women betrayed by partners or failed systems. Berard becomes her silent investor, and something more. Months later, she brings him his usual cappuccino. The foam heart is perfectly scented. He smirks, echoing that first moment between them. Center matters. She smiles. Only when you've found what's worth holding steady.